August the 4th, 2022. This is Wes Fryer. I'm here in Matthews, North Carolina at our beautiful Airbnb. Matthews is a suburb just southeast of Charlotte, North Carolina. And about 4 days ago, our family, the four of us, not our son who's in Houston, but both daughters, my wife, and our two dogs, traveled 1,000 miles over the course of 3 days and drove from Oklahoma City to Charlotte, North Carolina, where we are going to be living. And so in this video, I would like to reflect a little bit on what this experience was like driving 1,000 miles across the country. I started a series when I was back in Oklahoma this summer. I went up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I toured a submarine. And the main catalyst for submarine sermons was this idea of a radar screen and I like object lessons. I think that's really, really powerful. In fact, I should have grabbed the little walkie-talkie that we have because I want to talk about that today. But anyway, I think I'll tie this in and I'm going to put this in this series. And I probably should have a scripture verse if this is going to be like a sermon. But anyway, it's an object lesson. Maybe I should just call this object lessons. I don't even have my object with me today. But anyway, I don't have a written plan of everything that I want to talk about. But I've been thinking about this a little bit. I don't know that we know anyone else other than people, of course, in the military who get stationed other places, or people just whose job has moved them somewhere because that's where they needed to go work, who have just like decided to move across the country and sort of start fresh in a new place. We don't have any family here in North Carolina. We have some friends and some contacts and some people that we know, but it really is kind of a fresh start. I think the first thing I want to say about moving across the country, well, if we're Lord of the Rings fans. I love The Hobbit. I love, J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, trilogy and series. In fact, I think like this new version on Amazon is supposed to be coming, right? Where they're doing the Second Age, which is going to be prehistory to the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. But if you're familiar with Bilbo Baggins and either The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, Bilbo is an unusual hobbit because he ventures out of his home, of the Shire where he lives, and he goes on adventures. He goes on an adventure in the book The Hobbit, and then the longer version, which was written later, called The Lord of the Rings, Frodo, who is a relative, goes out. And one of the things they talk about is they have ancestors who are Tooks. The Tooks are these very unusual hobbits that seek adventures. And in fact, one of the Bull Roarer Took was really famous for his role in this battle. And he was a tall, large Took. And anyway, they talk about Tookishness and the fact that it's the Took in Bilbo and in Frodo, that emerges when they go out and go adventuring. Well, we sort of have realized, I think, that we are Tooks metaphorically, because both Shelley and I enjoy adventures. I got in kind of trouble with my grandmother for this, but we went on a big adventure the summer before we got married. We went out to Wyoming. We went backpacking in the Teton Wilderness on like a 5-day and 4-night, backpacking trip. And I don't know, when we made our connection together and decided to get married, I think we knew for each other that we enjoyed adventures, and that is what we're doing. But this was incredibly difficult, and I think I knew, of course, that this was going to be physically demanding, but it was psychologically traumatic in ways that I did not expect. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But let me talk a little bit about communication. Okay, so this is really crazy, right? Here I am sitting on the porch of this Airbnb in North Carolina, on the eastern side of the United States, and it still blows my mind what we're able to do and the connections that we're able to make thanks to the internet, fiber optics, the maturity of the web, all of these different things. On a technical note, if you may or may not be interested in this, but I'm actually sharing this video live, but it's being archived simultaneously to both YouTube and to Facebook, which is pretty cool. And most Wednesdays, we had to cancel our show last night, I do a weekly podcast with my friend Jason Neiffer, who usually is up in Missoula, Montana. That's where Jason lives. And we've been using this platform for, I think, a couple years now. We've switched around. Yesterday, I had an hour-long Zoom conversation with Kurt Gruhl. So those of you in our First Pres Edmond family know John and Kurt Gruhl and their families really well. Kurt has been my spiritual director as part of the Spiritual Directions or Heart Paths program, which is an ecumenical ministry where you meet with a spiritual director. And it's not exactly counseling. It is looking for how God is active in your life and having someone help you focus on seeing God. But anyway, I dropped off Shelly for her new hire orientation with Union County Public Schools. Shelly is going to be teaching 5th grade at Shiloh Valley Elementary, which is near Monroe, North Carolina. It's a little bit further to the southeast than where we are here in Matthews. Our home that we're going to be closing on in about 2.5 weeks is actually about just 10 minutes up. Anyway, she's at that meeting. I drop her off. I'm at a coffee shop. The Wi-Fi at the coffee shop's actually not great, so I test the speed. My internet's pretty good. I mean, I get to have a conversation with Kurt, and we have been doing Zoom calls for, really since COVID. I guess we've been doing Zoom calls for a couple years now. And how wonderful and amazing to be able to maintain that relationship and that connection, thanks to the technologies that we have. So I'm going to talk a little bit about communication. I do not have this in my hand. It's in one of our cars behind me. We're kind of a Toyota family. We've had a lot of Toyotas over the years. We've got a 20-year-old Toyota Highlander. We have two, 15-year-old other, Sequoia and a Camry. Driving across the country in 3 cars with 2 U-Hauls with the 4 members of our family and our 2 dogs felt like a very vulnerable and kind of dangerous experience. I'll talk about that, and then I'll talk a little bit about just the leaving part. There's a ton of things that can happen, and it almost feels like today you're a visitor when you're on the interstate system because the trucks are the ones that are just dominant there. They're so big, there's so many, and you have this heightened awareness when you go on a road trip, especially I think on interstate highways, of, how vitally important trucking is, right? There's like a sticker you can get that truckers and trucker families have, trucks bring it. But like supply chain, trucks are the heartbeat of our society in terms of the supplies and, the food and all kinds of products and everything that we need in our supply chains. And so, when you set off, especially on a long trip, you try and prepare and bring all the things that you have. But I have never had the experience of, we have moved places. We moved from Lubbock, Texas to Oklahoma City back in 2006. And at that time, we rented a big Penske truck and then, had, I guess we had 2 other cars that we were driving at that time. But I don't know, this time we sent stuff in a pod, which is really a fantastic service, and got some professional movers to pack that up. So that pod left with our, couch and washer and, a bunch of furniture and boxes, and it was packed to the absolute rim. And these 3 cars and the 2 trailers we were with were absolutely filled to the brim. Like we could not get another box anywhere. It was kind of ridiculous. There was stuff jammed everywhere. During the trip, it was absolutely wonderful to have two-way radios. In the process of packing up, I, found radios that we had 10 or 20 years ago when we started going camping and having a pop-up trailer and going to New Mexico. And especially when we would be at our campsite, we would have these radios and we'd be able to talk back and forth, and we would be fishing or hiking or different things. And it was just wonderful. That was great. Of course, we have phones, but with two-way radios, it just is so great to be able to get on and, just talk back and forth. And our daughters were just such troopers driving. My wife Shelley filled in a little bit for me and a little bit for Rachel. I guess he drove for Sarah a little bit too. Yeah. So I mean, she filled in a little bit with the driving, but mostly it was the girls and I. And it was very not only comforting, but it was important from a safety standpoint to be able to do that. And it was kind of funny. We were using one older radio and then two that we got at Walmart. Not all of them were working, and so anyway, these radios are compatible, but there was more static than there should have been, and so you kind of needed to start talking and pause a little bit. And so for whatever reason, if you're using CB radio, which I used CB back in the day, you would start by like breaker 19, and you talk and say whatever you wanted to say. And I don't know, I guess it's because Sarah calls one of our dogs Chicken. Anyway, that became the thing. And I'm saying this more for ourselves to remember this, in the past. It was a chicken, whatever you had to say. So we would correct each other if you didn't start off your transmission with chicken. It was so great, though, to stay in touch, and so important from a safety standpoint. On the third day, which we didn't plan on taking 3 days for the trip, we planned on just doing 2 days. But, we got to just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, the second day, and it was late, and it was getting dark, and it was raining. And thankfully, my wife said, I don't feel safe about this. We decided to just stay overnight in a downtown hotel, which was wonderful and lovely. And then we drove in during the day, which was great. But when we got to the other side of Asheville, coming into Charlotte, we were driving through some of the most intense and sustained rain that I have ever driven in. It was just buckets and buckets. And it was almost to the point of let's just pull over and stop. Had we not had those two-way radios, I don't know that we could have just kept our phones on the whole time. It was huge. So anyway, that's just a travel tip if you happen to be making some kind of a long trip in multiple cars, which, by the way, I would be fine to not recreate and redo this move again. Like this went well, but I've never prayed as intensely and constantly in any experience as I did over these 3 days. But in this process, it was great to have those radios. Let me talk a little bit about the psychology of leaving and downsizing. So we are downsizing our house. We were ready to actually do this before COVID. We thought, oh, this could be a good thing. We could downsize in our house and we'd be ready to, live in a smaller space. And, I've read and seen things about what is it called? Not the simple house. What's that? The little house movement? Is that what that is? The tiny house movement. And, there's a lot of validity to this idea that when you have less stuff, your life is less complex. And I think there's a piece that comes with simplicity. But it is so hard to let go of stuff and get rid of things. I'm about to have my 30th college reunion at the Air Force Academy this fall. It'll be in September, I think. So it's been 30 years since I graduated and then served briefly in the U.S. Air Force. Do you know it has taken me 30 years to get to the point where I am fine getting rid of a bunch of books about military history and strategy? Like I had the biography of MacArthur and Eisenhower and some things that honestly I never read, but I wasn't ready to get rid of them. I even had uniforms. And some of those we didn't get rid of. I was ready to get rid of them. And then some members of my family were like, we need to take off your name tags and things on these. But there was a lot of things that we got rid of. And that felt good. And that was challenging. And I don't know, books are interesting. Maybe you're like this, but I love my books. I love having my books on the bookshelf. I do love reading books. Now, I'm old enough now, since I'm over 50 and getting really old, that I like to read on a Kindle. And almost everything I read now, I would just as soon have it on a Kindle so I can make the text really large, or I listen to it on Audible. But there is just something about having books and having those on the shelf. Anyway, getting rid of those is healthy and good. But what ended up happening was we just absolutely didn't have space to take all the things we wanted to take. We were planning on taking one U-Haul, which was a 6-foot by 12-foot U-Haul trailer. And at 11:30 p.m., the night before we were supposed to leave, I brought everybody together, and thankfully our, significant others for our children were there helping, and we got, all these people pitching in, just packing and getting all kinds of stuff, as squeezed in as we possibly can. I realized we've got to have another trailer. Thankfully, we have another SUV. It already has a hitch on it. We've already towed U-Hauls with it before. And so I said, I'm just going to go to U-Haul in the morning and get another trailer. And so we did, and we filled that thing to the rim. But even with that second trailer, there were so many things that we could not take. And this was very emotionally hard on everyone. Definitely really emotionally hard on my wife. It was hard on me as well. And it literally got to the point of, we have got to just leave. There were things that I left behind. There were old, documentation things from when I left the Air Force and the military. I think there might have been even some journals. I think we got all of our photo albums. We got most of, I used to keep diaries and journals and write stuff out. And I think we got most of that. But there were quite a few things that we just had to get rid of. Thankfully, I got up actually early that night before we left and got tax forms and, taxes and things like that we needed to keep. But, oh my goodness, it is so hard to part with 30 plus years of stuff. And I think that we really did this was a catalyst for us. We really had to have this sort of forceful breaking, but it was a tearing, and it was a separation. It was hard, but we had to go. We had to get on the road. We literally could not get another box in. I mean, I'm going to unpack. I got both the trailers back. Wife and daughter helped, get our storage. We have a 10 by 10 storage facility that has all this junk like just packed in it, because we have this 3-week window of time in between moving here. I start school on Monday. Shelly starts school in like 2 weeks. She's teaching 5th grade. I'm teaching middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade computer science and robotics and media literacy. Anyway, we've got this time in between where we've got to have stuff stored, and then we get to move into our house. It was really, really hard. It was very, very difficult. And as some people have said, who are back in, Edmond and Oklahoma City, I mean, this is part of the reason why people don't want to move, right? Because my wife helped her parents, move out of Lubbock, Texas, when they came to Oklahoma City about a year after we moved. Her mother, actually, neither of her parents were present as she was doing the final, deciding what to bring and what to keep. I think that made it easier. It's really, really hard. And I guess my last thought is, man, when was this? My grandmother, she passed away. Did she pass away before Rachel was born or right after? So, okay, Rachel was born in 2003. So this would have been like 2001, 2002. We're living in Lubbock.
I was pregnant.
Yeah, Shelly's pregnant. So my grandmother died in her mid 80s. And she lived in a wonderful, wonderful retirement community that's still in Lubbock. It's called Carillon now. It used to be called John Knox Village. and she lived in a cottage. One of the reasons I chose Lubbock, Texas, and Reese Air Force Base for pilot training was because my grandmother was there. At that time there were 6 pilot training bases, and it depended on a lot of factors, but you could try to request your top choice, and I did, and I got to go to Reese in Lubbock. Anyway, she was at a wonderful place in a cottage, but when she needed more care, she could move into an apartment in the main building. She could move into nursing care. I will never forget when we had to move her into what was called the med center, and this was for nursing care. And it ended up, she moved in there and she got to move back out into the main building. And it wasn't like she moved into nursing care and had to stay there forever, but we had to close out her cottage. She wasn't going to go back to her cottage. And literally we had 2 or 3 sacks deep of paper grocery sacks of so many things. Her entire bed was just surrounded by all this stuff. And I think I can connect a little bit more with Grammy and what she went through, because it's just crazy how hard it is to give stuff up. Because I think, like it or not, our identities are derived significantly from the outside. We have this illusion maybe that I just have my identity inside me, and it's just I'm strong, and no matter where I am, I have my identity. And we want to be able to maintain that identity and to know who we are, and to be careful who we allow tell us who we are and influence us. But a lot of our identity is externally sourced. I heard a wonderful anthropologist, Michael Wesch. I've heard Michael talk multiple times, Dr. Wesch. He's a cultural anthropologist at Kansas State University. Shout out to Michael. And I don't know, 10 years plus, 15 years ago, actually, he and I were both keynotes at a lovely conference in Edmond, Oklahoma, at UCO, called the Heartland E-Learning Conference. And I will never forget, and I've heard him tell versions of this, his story about being in Papua New Guinea, which is sort of a Stone Age culture. It was at that time. And how being this white guy from the Midwest United States, I think I don't know where he grew up, but he's landed in Kansas. Anyway, he almost lost himself because he had no cultural markers. Everything was foreign. Everything was different. And I had never really thought about that before with identity, was that so much of our identity comes from things that are reflected back to us in the relationships we have, the people that surround us, but also the things, right? The clothes we wear, the things we see. And identity is so important. And it's not something that is static. It doesn't just freeze in place when you graduate high school or you graduate college or get your first job or whatever. Like, identity is constantly in flux and in motion. So anyway, that's part of our story now. We are we're not starting over, but we're starting a new chapter. And I am just so thankful. If I was going to read a scripture, which I didn't prepare for, but there's a story about, I think it was about Jacob, but it had to do with, the Israelites and the promised land. And there's this phrase called an Ebenezer, which is a stone that is a marker, that you have this Ebenezer, and you have it to remember, where you've come from. So there's a lot of emotion that's involved in this, a lot of difficulty, but so much good and so much positive. So very thankful, very excited. There's new opportunities. I'm really looking forward to my new school. I'm looking forward to my new colleagues, to new opportunities. I'm looking over here at my Lego Spike Prime robotics kit, because like I said, my thing about when I went to Pittsburgh was going to a robotics conference, a week-long robotics conference. And so I don't know what my closing thought is. Many of you watching this may or may not do something like what we've done, decide to move across the country, there's there's teachers that go international, right? I've met many of them. I know many of them. And that kind of seems crazy to some people. What? You're going to leave all your stuff and go across the ocean and, teach somewhere else? There's a lot of value in being able to go to a new place. And I think there's a lot of good skills and resiliency that we can develop when we are able to do that, to go somewhere else and to make connections. But I think that there's a lot of value in being intentional and deliberate about the things that we do choose to keep and the things that we part with. Maybe that's something that we can all think about a little bit is, you know, there, there's value in simplicity and in downsizing, because clutter not only clutters our physical space, it can clutter our mind. And I know my wife definitely has felt that way. She loved it when we were putting our house on the market because we had to have everything so clean. We're talking nothing on the kitchen counters, right? I mean, that is really not the normal for us. And she loved that. But then after we had, had the offer and we're waiting to close on the house, which by the way is supposed to happen today, the house got cluttered again, and it affects your mind. So maybe that's just a closing thought. Think about the ways in which you can be, and I will think about this too, very intentional about the pictures we're gonna put on the wall, the objects that we'll have, the ways in which we're going to shape our physical environment, both at home and then also thinking about the classroom, because all of that has an impact on how we feel, how we think. It can have an impact on our emotions. So I am not going to be editing this because my phone that I'm using right now doesn't have huge capacity, and I thought I just want to do this live. So I will just put this in the description on YouTube, and I'll link this below on the Facebook post. But if you want to connect with me, I now have a website, wesfryer.com/after, and that has links to a whole bunch of channels because I tend to overshare things, and I'm into a lot of different things: media literacy, cooking, playing with media, using these technologies in transformative ways to learn and engage students and to help students show what they know with media, yada, yada, yada. So if you join me, thank you very much. If you're seeing this later, I'm glad that you're able to see it. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to sharing more ideas and thoughts with you here from Charlotte, North Carolina. Have a great day.